So today we've been shooting in this incredible barn here, and we've got all these neat cars to shoot with. But we've been shooting a lot with the Manny Ortiz Beauty Dish because we've been just lighting our model Kaylee today, just kind of more of the headshot close-up. But we moved into a wider shot, so we've pulled out the Octabox Large, and one of the reasons is we kind of feel like on this we're going to be able to throw light not only on Kaylee but also over the top of her and get the car. So we're actually going to have it set up a little bit higher so that light's going to fall not just on her but across the car. So we're going to have her sit down on top of that little crate that we found, and then from back quite a ways we've switched lenses to a 70 to 200 so that we can compress both the car and her a little bit. And we've been playing around, and what we found is that shooting this on the ground is really, really helpful, getting really low. All right, so we took a few shots from up high, and they looked really good, but what we'd found is if we get down really low, I mean really low, like resting the camera on the concrete, it just created a great look. All right, so that looks really good. I love that low angle, and I cannot wait to get this home so I can start post-processing this image. I'm going on. All right, so here we go. I've brought my images into Adobe Bridge. I'm not a Lightroom user. I use Adobe Photoshop primarily, and I'll use Bridge for culling and for just the general stuff on my images. So loaded up into Bridge, I have all of my images. This is the image that I was excited about working on. So I'm going to go ahead and double click that, which is going to open up into Camera Raw before it takes it into Photoshop. You can see that it is a little bit underexposed. And generally, I like to shoot people a little bit underexposed. This might be a little bit more than I normally do, but it was kind of a little more difficult situation, just trying to get so much light thrown to get the car with a little bit of fall off. So I just want to go through kind of quickly how I would edit this photo. This is not a tutorial on it. I just want you to see kind of my thought process on what I do when it comes to post-processing. So number one, the first thing I'm always going to do is generally, again, because I shoot a little bit underexposed, I generally will make sure I'm zoomed in, because the most important thing is my subject, is I'm going to start bringing up that exposure to where I feel like I'm right on that edge of it being now overexposed on her. So I'm going to set that. I usually don't play at all with the contrast. Sometimes if my image feels a little too contrasty, I will. But the next thing is always, figuring out those shadows, not pushing them too far, because if I push them too far, yes, I see more, but I start losing contrast. So my highlights are already kind of brought up with exposure. So I'm just going to bring it up a little bit, and I'll play around. Sometimes I'll increase the darks, the actual black in the image, or I'll bring it down. I feel like maybe just bringing this picture down just the tiniest bit. So right there, we've kind of made a huge difference. The next thing I'm going to do is generally all my white balance, I'll click it to auto just to see what Adobe thinks it should be. And yes, it gets nice and pure white in her dress, but it feels very cool. So I'm just going to bring some of that warmth back into the image, and I think that's pretty good. Otherwise, sometimes what I'll do is I'll grab the eyedropper. You could do all these things in Lightroom. If you've not used Camera Raw, it's Lightroom. Lightroom came from Camera Raw. So, and I might click around and, on some of the areas that's either a white or gray, and let it kind of do its thing. So I actually didn't change that much. I'm just going to put a tiny bit more warmth into it, and we'll back out and kind of see what it looks like. You can see I laid on the ground, so it's a little bit crooked. I think we're going to fix that later. I could fix it here, but we're going to fix that in Photoshop, because we're going to use some of the new generative items within Photoshop to do some of the more heavy lifting. Here's something I want to show you, because I actually like using this clarity and texture slider in my images quite a bit. And if you know anything about frequency separation, this is kind of like a first step. It's an easy way to do somewhat of like a frequency separation. So your clarity slider generally is going to affect to me, even though this is named texture, I find that it affects the texture more. And a lot of times I just bring it up to where I see a little more contrast in the face, not a lot. And then I use the texture slider to kind of smooth everything out. So I might bring that down until her face looks, I'm not trying to do all of my skin smoothing at this point, but, I'll bring it down. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to sharpen. Generally, I sharpen my images for the camera that I shot this with between 70 and 80. I just feel like that works for me. Then I'm going to bring up my manual noise reduction just to luminance. Usually it's somewhere over 15, never usually more than 20. So I just kind of look at that and go, okay, that looks pretty good to me. The other thing that I might do is my color mixer. I have hue, saturation, and luminance to choose from. Most of the time, I'll grab my saturation slider and I'll run my oranges and I'll go, yep, there's a lot of orange in skin. I love that they've put this slider in a few years back because that seems to be the problem with skin. Anytime I do something, I don't try to fix it in a large view. This is so important. I'm going to zoom in because I'm worried about my subject. And if you notice, I'm just going to back some of that orange off. There, I think on this one about 10. And then I'm going to go to my luminance, and I can actually, if I want, I can brighten up those oranges, but I feel like it gives way too much of a glowy feel. So I'm not going to do that. But the truck has kind of, faded off into the background. So I'm going to try boosting the reds. There we go. I think that brightens that truck up quite a bit. And I may also go down to the hue and pick what color that red's it was kind of an orangey red, but it was getting too much to look like a tomato. So I might change that hue a little bit and I'll see what the saturation does. I actually like kind of taking the saturation down, and maybe I will boost it a little brighter somewhere. I don't know, right there. So that looks good to me. I think that's a great start. I think it's a huge improvement from, when I first opened this image. And I'm going to go ahead and click open, and it's going to bring it into Photoshop. So again, we're not doing anything. This is a raw image. We're not doing anything to the raw image. We're getting ready to now create something out of it. So now it's opened up in Photoshop. It is a native Photoshop file we're working on. So we have all of those pixels there uncompressed. So the stand is in the way. This is where AI features, I think, have just become the wow factor, because these are all things that I could do before, but I would have to figure out how I'm going to clone that out, and it would just take a while. It would look good, but now all I have to do is grab my lasso tool. I'm just going to lasso out where this stand is, and we'll just grab the stand. And some of this probably won't even be in it while I crop it. And I'm going to, up at the top, if you don't know this yet and you're tired of this being everywhere in your workspace, you can place this little bar wherever you want it to be. And on these three little dots, you can say pin the bar position and it will stay there. In the other versions, the beta versions, it would move around every time you could reopen. Now it stays where it is. Generative fill. I'm going to click on there. I want it to remove, so I'm not even going to tell it remove. I'm just going to hit the generate button, and let's see what Adobe comes up with. Now, remember, we're working on the cloud, and depending on when you're watching this, I believe November 1st of 2023, you're going to be on a credit system on how often you can use this, and then you're going to start having to buy credits to use it because it takes a lot of computing power. So it's finished now, and over on our right-hand side, we have 3 variations, and I always love when I'm doing something big like this to kind of click the 3 variations and see which one looks closest. And I like this second one, right? And I can actually turn that layer on and off and see what it did. Kind of globally to everything. I think that looks pretty good. So we're going to accept that. Now, when I'm doing a project for a client, you're never going to see me closing layers, but today you're going to see me compressing layers just so it doesn't get a little overwhelming. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Control Shift E, which compresses and puts those layers together. Again, I'm not doing this as a recommendation. It's not how I do it normally, but it's just going to keep things cleaner for this video. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to hit C on my keyboard, which gives me my crop tool. I'm going to do it in an 8x10 because you know what? I'm going to post this on Instagram. So up at the top, I don't know if you know this little, I'm going to show you some just little extra tips today. So there's this little level bubble up here. If I click the level bubble, all I have to do is find somewhere that has a line, and I'll click and stretch it out and let it go. And it will set it to like perfectly level. So I love using this tool. I think I'm going to show about that much of the floor. And then I'm going to raise this up so that third line is right about her eyeballs. And we'll kind of center her up there. I want to set my crop to generative expand and hit OK. And now Adobe is going to fill in that area that wasn't there. So kind of just like the generative fill, but this is expanding, and it's doing a fantastic job. I think this saves a lot of time. There we go. I'm not even going to look at the 3 versions. I think that version, yeah, maybe I will. That's a little better, a little bit better. I don't know. I'm going to use that first one, and I'm just going to flatten that image so we can keep on working here. So the next thing I do is we have talked about this. If you've been in any of our Photoshop classes that we put on, we talk a lot about frequency separation. I do it through an action file. So we're working in 8-bit. So I just select 8-bit and I say play. It's going to give me this default of how blurry I want the one area to be. And I'm going to say, okay, this is not a lesson on frequency separation. Again, I'm just showing you. So I'm going to zoom in on her skin. I'm going to open up these layers, and we have the high frequency and the low frequency. If I turn off the low, so this is all of our texture, and the low frequency is all of our color information. So we're going to work on our texture first. All I'm going to do is hit J so that I'm using my healing brush, and it's the healing brush that you actually sample and click. I do not use the brand new tool. It doesn't work well when you're doing frequency separation, because it's really important. It gets confused and you don't really pick the right textures a lot of times. For this, there's not a lot of things to fix here. There was just a few little blemishes in her skin that I'm going to go ahead and take care of. She has this mole here on her face, and we're leaving that because, you know, for me, unless somebody asks me, the ethics of editing is always, if it's permanent, leave it. If it's temporary, remove it, right? If we've got blemishes, we've got a cut, something like that, we're going to try to remove it for the client. But other than that, we're removing. They know what they look like. And to me, it's a beauty mark. So we're going to leave that in. And we just couple little clicks there, and we cleaned up her skin. Now, on her leg, Kaylee here, our model, is a volleyball coach. So she's really into sports. And so she's got legs a little banged up. It's volleyball season. So I'm just going to select things around here and just kind of get some of those areas. She was really concerned about this bruise on her knee from a game, but we're going to go ahead and we're just going to make sure the texture is right. And I know that you're watching this right now thinking, oh no, he's smoothing things out, but that bruise is still there. But we're going to take care of that in a second. So if I were to click off this high frequency, you're going to see this color information here. So I am going to, the way I handle it is I select that layer. I use my clone stamp tool, about 3 times the size of the area that I'm going to work on. And I'm going to change my opacity to about 30%. I just hit the number 3 and it turns it to 30% opacity. When you use a brush, I don't know if you know that you hit any of your numbers, like right now, if I hit a 7, it's going to go to 70% opacity, but I like working about 30%. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, and then I'm going to drag over, select and drag some of it up, some of it down. And what I'm doing is I'm just basically kind of smearing this. This is a technique that I learned years ago, called the slick force method. I think it's one of the greatest things that prior to frequency separation for fixing skin. But that's a whole nother long conversation. But you can see now I've kind of blended that out. Now, when I turn the high frequency back on, guess what? Her bruise is gone. These are things you can do pretty quickly. I think right over here, if I was really concerned, I'll turn the high frequency off just so you can see it. After you do it for a while, you don't even really think about it. You just know that if I kind of every time I'm sampling and then I click and drag. I'm sampling, I click and drag. But I get into kind of a rhythm and I just, click and sample, drag, sample, drag, sample, drag. There we go. I'm not going to overdo it because then the skin just starting to look kind of weird. So I just wanted to clean up a few of those things. I might do a better job if this was actually going to get printed, but we're not printing this. We're going to put this on Instagram, just have fun with it. So look at that. We've done just a few things. You know what? You may go, yeah, that's way more than I ever would do, or that's a lot of work. Once you do this for a while, it doesn't really become work. It's kind of fun. You watch a little Netflix and you edit. I'm going to get rid of, this is the reflection of the skylight in the building. And the way I'm going to do that, again, this is not a tutorial. I love using, I'm going to close up these layers over here, but I use my pen tool. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select to get my starting anchor point. I'm going to click. I'm going to drag to where I want to go, let it go. I'm going to go a little further, click, drag to where I want to go, let it go. Pen tool is really an easy tool to use. It's just, I wish somebody when I started to learn had told this, is just click, drag where you want it to go and let it go. Click, and we're going to make the turn. So this, I don't have to worry so much. I click and I kind of drag to where I want to go. And I'm going to close that loop. I'm going to right click and say, turn it into a selection. It gives me this little make selection box, and I'm going to say, okay, now it's a selection. I'm going to do this on a new layer. So I'm going to click the new layer button down here. And I'm going to use my clone stamp, not at 30%. I'm going to hit 0 to get it back to 100% opacity. Told you could use your numbers to do that. And I'm going to just select over here in this dark area. And I'm just going to paint over that. I'm just clone stamping in the dark area. And what I love about the clone stamp, it's not paint. I'm not painting it in. It's because it's bringing the texture in from that area. So I will deselect it. And now we've gotten rid of that. We could do the same thing to all of the spots on the truck. I've done things for car magazines where we had to spend hours, cloning out the soft boxes and things. Let me show you a couple other things. I'm going to go ahead and flatten this entire image and show you a couple other things. I don't do this every time, but if you're have not used this feature in Photoshop, it is wonderful. And that is up here under filter, you have neural filters. If you've never used it, you have to say download, and you have to download the filter. But the skin smoothing, all it does is skin smooth the face. It doesn't select the entire body. So it selected her face. I'm going to hold down Control. If you were on a Mac, you'd hit Command and the plus symbol. And that just lets me zoom in, hit my space bar, and I can move it around because sometimes I didn't zoom in enough. And I'm going to say, turn on the skin smoothing, right? And it smoothed that skin out. I always make sure this output says new layer because there's some things that I might not like about it. I'm going to say, okay, and that's going to apply it. And it jumped out of the screen there. There we go. So this skin smoothing, now I could turn that layer on and off and kind of see what it did. When I look at it really close, it feels like, oh no, it blurred some areas. And sometimes it does, like maybe the nostrils now feel a little bit, not sharp enough. And if that's a concern to you, you can always put a mask on that, and you can grab a brush and you can just mask that area out. So let me actually grab a brush. And then I can go in and kind of clean up some of those areas. Sometimes it bleeds into the eyelashes because it's trying to fix the skin. Make sure it's not applied to any of her lips there. Usually it doesn't. So, I think it's a quick way to throw a little extra on top of it. And if you don't know anything else about skin smoothing, this is going to make it probably better than if you do nothing at all. So we have some great new tools that work really well. And then that's generally, I just wanted to show you through it. I'll show you one more thing. This has nothing to do with, I'll show you two things. Anybody that knows me, I never stop talking. And I just say one more thing is I use gradient maps all the time. I just think it's an important thing to show you. If you've never used gradient mapping because you don't know what it is, it's going to become your best friend. I'm going to throw a gradient map on, and then I'm going to set my blending layer to soft light. and you're still saying it looks terrible. And then you come up into your gradient maps. I have some saved, and I've downloaded different gradients. These are ones that I like to use all the time. And once I click, it's just mapping out what those colors should look like. I'm going to go ahead and just use my arrow keys to toggle through a few of these. I know that these two gradients I like quite a bit, and I'm just going to quickly toggle through. I kind of like what that one's doing, but I think that one there is going to be the one I'm going to use. And again, this is a whole different lesson. I just want to show this to you. You might say, yeah, that just kind of killed everything in that image. It kind of flattened it all out. Well, opacity is always your best friend for a layer. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the opacity completely off, and I'm just going to start bringing it up until I kind of like it. So there we go. So here's the before the gradient map, and the after. This kind of gets all of your colors to kind of do what it needs to do. So one last thing then is I love these filters. I don't have any kind of affiliate program with them, but Exposure Software has a thing called Exposure 7. It used to be called Alien Skin, and I love their workflow here. It's already going to click on the last thing that I used, which is always my favorite, which are these simulation Fuji camera films. And I love these two, Velvia and Provia. And I think for this one, that Provia looks really good. I love these two if you don't want to get too much color, but I think this one needs the color. So I'm going to go ahead and apply that. So these are all things, again, that just happen really fast. See, the entire image brightened up without any spots blowing out. So we can turn that the before and the after. I like what it did with the colors, and I think we're going to be happy with that image. So just a quick look at my workflow. Yes, there's times where I overdo it, or I work a lot harder on an image, but hopefully you just grabbed a few tips today, and appreciate you taking the time to watch what's happening. So I'm going to go ahead and save this out, and we're going to go ahead and post this on Instagram.